Commission to order. Call this meeting, the Historic District Commission to order, Thursday, January 16th, 3 p.m. Let's see, this meeting is being audio-video recorded. Please don't say or share anything you don't want displayed on the YouTube. Do we have any members on the YouTube?
Nope.
Okay. Or on the Zoom, rather. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
There's 5 of us here, so for the vote, Carrie, Joe, Val, myself, and Angus, and we won't be voting here on anything today. This is a general, this is a discussion of topics or portions of articles that are or will be on annual town meeting warrant for the HCC, just to kind of have a little bit of a discussion, see if there's anything we would like to ask of the sponsors, and to help work in partnership when and if these are approved. That's
Okay.
that. There's, really what I was hoping to get based on some comments I received from members is, for instance, one of them talks about a maximum height and what we thought about that, so that we could share that information with the sponsor, who's the planning board. Let me see here. The first one on the docket. So I'm just going to kind of run through these and then poll people as we go. The first one on the docket is the zoning bylaw amendment to 4181L. 4181L, as we all know, is subdivision of structure of lots where structures pre-existed zoning. In a nutshell, it's not 100% perfect, but that's basically what it is. Emily Molden came before us. I texted with Emily. There are some technical and other changes that have been suggested by town council that Emily supports. And she wasn't going to be able here to be today. She wanted me to convey to you all that the planning board, when they reviewed this, were very supportive and of the article's concept, that they were also very pleased to hear that the HDC was involved and supported the article. And she appreciates your support. So that's kind of where we are with that one. I don't know that there's anything we need.
What is it?
This is the amendment. Well, I'm gonna back up a second.
I helped her write it, so I can be happy.
Yeah. We met, I just want to fill in the background. We met, I don't know if everyone was there, and I presume that you may have been. When we met at a regular meeting, Emily came in at the beginning of the meeting, explained the intent of the article, which was to help prevent the development that has occurred more recently than not, and to revert the article or revert the text of the zoning bylaw to what it used to be. We supported that, and the planning board is supporting that, and Meg may have a couple of comments.
Yeah, because we don't know what that is.
So 4181L subdivision is a by right allowance. There's no public hearing, there's no public comments that can take place. It's something allowed under state statute. And what triggers the allowance for this is when you have multiple structures on a single lot that predate the adoption of subdivision control, which is 1955 on this island. So we're talking about older buildings. So what our zoning bylaw currently says is that when one pursues this path of subdivision, they're automatically granted pre-existing non-conforming status. And what that means in zoning is they're automatically granted 30% from whatever. It really depends on the lot size. So it could be either 30% or 1,500. And in either event, more often than not, it's significantly more than what they otherwise would have been allowed to develop. So it's causing this increase in development. So it's also twofold, because A&R is a by right subdivision. There's no public comment or public notice. HDC, while it does have a notice component, it's not the same as a special permit public hearing. It doesn't have the same type of notice requirements or participation. So that was also problematic. So what this bylaw does is it still allows you, you have to be allowed to subdivide. That's a state thing. But it requires now a special permit from the zoning board of appeals to alter the ground cover or volume in any capacity Furthermore, you cannot extend beyond what otherwise would have been allowed on the original lot. So it's really just validating that you can separate the ownership, but you cannot build more than you otherwise would have been allowed to anyway,
When it was
So-
one lot.
when it was one lot.
Oh,
Does that-
okay.
But does that, because there is that thing, which if whichever's more, if the zoning, so that or
It's gone.
1,500,
That is
that's
gone.
gone.
We're
Right.
taking, this bylaw amendment takes that away.
Okay.
It requires any alteration to be viewed by the zoning board of appeals through a special permit process so that, you know, it triggers all of the notice requirement and decisions. It requires a deed restriction be placed on both lots because the special permit would only travel with the altered lot.
Oh.
So it's multifaceted and it doesn't allow for an increase in development that what otherwise would have been allowed.
Go
anyway.
under the
I
radar.
think that's great because what's happened as a result of those is we get really weird big buildings on this much space.
In awkward locations, landlocked.
Yeah,
Right, usually not compliant with setbacks.
right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Angus,
So, I mean, not all the examples are like this, but imagine a historic structure, a shed, a garage. Something that we, is kind of a dying breed in the back of the lot. What's been happening is that becomes a flag lot in itself. So the pole of the flag goes alongside the existing structure back to a lot where that historic structure that allows them to do the subdividing in the development ends up getting destroyed or removed or something and then overdeveloped. So what this does is it keeps the whole lot within the zoning that is appropriate for the whole lot as opposed to two separate lots with changed zoning.
I
Interesting.
like it.
Good.
Me too. It'd be interesting if there was some sort of, I don't know how that would work, incentive to prevent. Because as you're describing it, I have a client that I submitted something, just put together an application today. They have a house in town, 1700s with a garage in the back, 1949-ish. So technically it's subdivided. They have zero interest in subdividing. It's an oversized lot anyway. They could subdivide it if they had frontage. They have no interest in it. But they want to do, but they could, and a lot of people do it just because they're being advised that having two lots in town, even if you treat it as one property. Like, so is there some sort of, like, if we say we're not gonna exercise the state law, this 81L, and put it into our deed, is there any? I guess they could do that if they wanted to, but there's no
you're saying deed restrict their lot themselves?
deed restrict, right? Is there any kind of way to put in a benefit? It's just not.
I don't know, but if there was,
Incentivize.
it would be interesting because if they were, I mean, I think you can deed restrict your own lot.
Yeah, the town couldn't.
The town wouldn't, this wouldn't be a governmental thing, but they could also tie it in with maybe they could explore tax credits
That's it. You got
for
it.
historic preservation. That would be an
Money
interesting thing.
number on it.
Right, like for instance, the article that allows you to move a building, but you get consideration of ground cover because you're trying to save buildings.
Which I
I
love
don't,
that.
I don't
We're
know
gonna
what,
talk about.
I don't know what the consideration would be, but I could see that there'd be family members that would be interested, hey, we don't want them to subdivide the lot, it's an oversized lot, we want to keep it as is. But if we keep it as is there, I don't even know, I haven't thought about it, but because I don't think you're not gonna want to allow an increase in ground cover, that doesn't make.
Well, I think that's a good discussion for the CLG because we can be through the certified local government trying to work up between ourselves as a regulatory agency who has to deal with the ultimate effect of these things. And the historical commission, which deals with recommendations and can get involved in grants, and our preservation planner. Some type of a program where this type of a solution, as Joe's been discussing and bringing up, comes into play, and that could, in addition to what is in the text for annual town meeting, I think the text of annual town meeting will dissuade what is the I don't want to demonize capitalism. It is what it is. Like these are lots that their highest and best use is to break them up under the current system and develop them. Because if you're somebody who's looking to generate income or whatever, that's what you do. Not suggesting it's good, I'm not suggesting it's great. The article will address that by putting a cap on it so that they're not able to create a greater density. As if there's two separate lots built to the full density, so it's a good thing.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The zoning, this is a zoning bylaw.
Yeah.
The zoning board is on board,
Planning board.
planning board, sorry. What about the zoning board? When they go for a special permit, they're gonna be asking for more ground cover. Are they on board to say?
So
The new.
Meg can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is zoning has. They go by what the zoning bylaw is, so then they regulate the zoning bylaw. And the zoning bylaw
Okay,
says
so-
you can't have more ground cover.
Okay, and the planning board is the special permit where they ask for more and they get it or they don't.
No, so the
That's
planning
where I
board's
get
reviewing
confused.
this because they're the statutory board that reviews zoning articles that go to town meeting.
Okay,
The zoning article proposes that the ZBA is the permit granting authority in this
okay,
case.
so you
and
would apply to the
Yeah.
zoning board.
Of appeals, the planning board wouldn't have involvement in the day-to-day process of this, they're just supporting the concept of this article to move forward through the town
Okay,
meeting process,
so-
and then within the article, the language is structured almost similar to the covenant lot, that you can't have more density than you otherwise were allowed anyway, which is why the entire property is subject to a deed restriction enforceable by the ZBA, and the special permit ties with that newly created lot, but when they're looking at, you know, how they're renovating these structures or building these new structures, the ZBA does not have the authority to grant ground cover beyond collectively 40%. So if they're at
That's great.
60% here, you know, they only get the difference over here.
Okay,
It's
so there's no
not-
loophole that you can apply and get special.
Right.
No.
Whatever.
So I think what you were thinking was that you can go to the ZBA for a variance.
Yeah.
Under certain conditions.
Yeah.
But this, the way that the
It's
planning board has
structured.
structured the language, the planning staff and the planning board.
with them.
It eliminate with
love
Emily, it eliminates
okay, yeah.
that, so it really addresses. The on the street concern we have, literally, the streetscape. And then we can focus on, hey, you only have this much, great, that eliminates one whole topic for us, which is the density, and then we can focus on. Meeting the guidelines, which are to, in the old historic districts, have those structures be up towards the street. To maintain the planning pattern that existed historically,
Mhm.
so it seems like a really good thing.
That's
And this is the one I didn't think we were gonna talk much about.
Oh, okay, hello. You say.
Yeah, no, it's good, it's good,
Sounds-
it's great.
And I can tell you, like, I'm so thankful for Emily collaborating with us because it started off a little rocky 2 years ago. And, you know, we kind of both saw each other's perspective and came up with a wonderful solution, I think, so,
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
great.
It's
That's
more
really good.
collaboration is always good.
yes.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
Speaking of which, we never finished
I
our
know, we need
collaboration.
to,
we're gonna talk about that.
Okay,
When you have
Um,
like-minded people and missions, then collaboration is easy. It's when you have two different factors coming at it from different, you know, values or sides that it becomes.
we're gonna do a
difficult to
slap
collaborate.
contest. You ever seen those?
Well, I would agree with the comments. I would just add that a compromise on a bad idea is still a bad idea. So collaboration can be good, but not if it's a compromise on a bad idea. Okay, so the next one is a little more technical. It's modify the town code, chapter 124, signs, satellite dishes, roof lines. I put this in as a placeholder to address a couple of topics. One is I put this in as a citizen with the language to address this. The issues at hand are, one, the demolition delay is under this heading, signs, satellite dishes and roof lines. So that's problematic because you don't even know where to find it if you,
That
Don't
doesn't
know.
even make sense.
right? So you don't know where to find it if you're not aware of it. You would know by looking at the chapter and section reference, but not by perusing the town code.
Mhm.
So one of the things I'd like to do is modify the language to address that. This is not a zoning bylaw, it's a town code bylaw, so it would go through the select board. My intention was to get some language together, had some family matters come up, setbacks, so I'm still hoping to do that, see if they'll put it on the warrant. If they won't, I understand that, and it was written up to I think I did a fallback write-up that it would be for discussion at town meeting to see what people thought about it. You know, it might be a 3-minute discussion or it might be longer. That's part of it. The other part of it is the text that deals, that addresses the minimum maintenance standards is very difficult to understand. I think if it went to a Superior Court, they would all be shaking their heads and might even, I don't know. I mean, I would argue as an attorney that I'm not an attorney, but as a litigator, I would argue, like, this makes no sense. How can my client follow it? So, and that's not anyone who's present. This has been on the books for quite some time, present here, or I think even in town government. So, I wanted to address that. I think that there is an opportunity in addition to address, and this is what I'd like to get some feedback on the floor at town meeting. The minimum standards haven't really been followed. Like, there haven't been, maybe for good reasons, it's under assigned satellites, dishes and roof lines. But the way, this came up in a short discussion recently at one of the hearings. And it was about, I'm not going to name the applications because they're not relevant. The discussion revolved around, well, how do we prevent this from becoming a vigilante thing? And the answer I gave then is that we put it through a process that provides the HDC exercises due diligence. And otherwise, as it's currently written up, it can be interpreted that someone complains, HDC staff will write a ticket, and your relief is to go to Superior Court. Well, that seems to me ripe for vigilantism. If you want to tie up a neighbor, if there's a, minor like paint peeling and there's shingles falling off.
Is that on this one?
Yeah, this is this
It's
one.
number 2, it's just not like,
It's the minute, this is, okay, so the lead-in was that,
I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, so I
well,
can't.
that's
yeah.
intentional because
It-
it's too,
It
there's like,
seems very crazy.
yeah. The first issue is that the minimum standards are located under this heading. The second issue is that they're written in a way that's confusing. The third matter is a concept, and the public here, not a public hearing, a public meeting is held at the HDC for the HDC to review the facts. And the HDC determines whether, in their opinion, based upon the code language, that the minimum standard is being violated. And then if that's the case, they request a ticket be issued. On the other hand, if it's being used for vigilantism or just out of an over concern, which is also a real thing, a concern for your neighborhood, that's, you're overly concerned versus something happening down the street, 600 yards away. Yeah, so the idea is that perhaps the HCC gets involved as the first stop in the review process to determine, based on the language within the text of the code, whether the minimum standard is not being upheld. If that's the case, it would go to a ticketing situation, and then or they put in an application to remedy it, and then they pursue the remedies, like recently happened. That's in one instance. And then I think, to my mind, it's a win for everyone because the situation is addressed, the work is being done, and even if it isn't a violation, versus people getting tied up in Superior Court, animosity growing. I don't know what the docket at Superior Court is, but I don't know if it's 6 months, a year.
right to Superior Court versus to a board like ours. It seems pretty severe.
I think that to some extent, there's some administrative discretion, but I'm also concerned that puts a lot of pressure on the administrative arm of government, because how do you discern which one of these is going to blow up in your face if you hold the ticket and give them an opportunity to fix it? how this typically has been addressed, my understanding, and Holly or Meg is aware too, could probably address this if I'm incorrect. Is that a violation may come in or a notice may come in. Well, let me say this, I don't know how this one is handled. I know how violations are typically handled. A courtesy notice goes out informing someone that there's an issue or potentially an issue. And please to prove one way or the other, or prove that there isn't an issue. And if there isn't an issue, that's addressed and the matter goes away. If there is an issue, then it escalates to the next step. The comments that I'm making is that there is no next step. The process is you get a ticket and you go to Superior Court to have a hearing.
Right.
And I think, to me, as a citizen of the community, if what we're looking for is to compel people to go to Superior Court, even if there's not a quasi judicial regulatory agency making the determination of whether the minimum standard is being violated. And unlike a speeding ticket where the officer sees you went 40 and a 35, they give you a ticket. There's a very big difference in those two things,
It's very subjective.
but they're addressed the same way. And I think that that's problematic. Also, zoning, I think, is addressed this way, and zoning is also a little bit different. You have a house on your property and it's within the setback. And it's, clearly evident it's within the setback. Maybe an as-built survey was turned in or something, or it's just, you can measure off the neighboring house that has a survey. That a ticket could be written for. This is a very different animal where there's a subjective determination. And I think that it would be beneficial for the community to have a body of elected officials who can weigh in fair and evenly and make a determination and then decide if it.
It's not unlike the historic determination.
Yeah.
This board can assess if it's a, validly contributing historic structure versus is this a validly falling apart building that's,
Right.
not
There's
being
question-
taken care of.
sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, if there's question about why would it be the HDC versus some other entity that would review it. If you look at, let's just say I have my house and I wanna repaint it and I wanna change my windows. You gotta go to the HDC. The HDC gets involved for a maintenance issue. I want to replace my roof, a like kind replacement. That's already there. So if you, in the remediation of the ticket, at some point, you're probably gonna have to bring the HDC in because a door fell off, you have to replace the door, or your paint is peeling and you decided, you know what? Well, I'm gonna repaint it the same color as a non-issue, but I bet automatically the HDC would end up becoming part of that process. So to have them weigh in on that as the person that reviews whether or not it's a violation, and then for them to come back. We've seen it unfold a little bit on some recent applications where you're getting updated. First, you're getting, about the project, then you're getting updated as a group. And then if they do have to make a change, you're already familiar with it and you're in the process of it.
Yeah.
So
In
it makes sense.
conjunction with a building inspector though as well, because of health and safety.
Yeah, I wondered whether or not the HDC were busy and it sounds like a whole other department and how many of these would actually, if this whole, how do I put it?
Yeah, I'm not looking to create a cottage industry here.
Right, exactly, like, of people like, hey, you know what, that guy, their house is
Right.
well maintained, and are we gonna get more of these in? Well, it'd be interesting to see.
Well, that's kind of, Joe, that two things. One is on the tails of it, the demolition play. I always want to say that with respect to this. The minimum maintenance includes, as some of us are aware of, a demolition component, which automatically goes to HDC. So it seemed to me that given the historic nature of the mission of the HDC, which is preserving the historic character and nature of the character and setting, and so on and so forth, and the fact that there's already a doorway into an HDC application in the instance of a neglect, which I guess the reason I want to say is demolition delay is really, it's a demolition by neglect, which there's very few of those, so I don't think
Huge
this.
strategy with big business.
Yeah, yeah, so
That's
I think
really
it would be
agency.
legitimate, reasonable approach to kind of cleaning up something that's been identified without creating really unintended consequences because it's a very clear process and it's, I think, easy to implement. We've just proofed it on one. And as you were saying, also, in the instance that something is or isn't a violation, the next step is the demolition application. And it's beneficial for the HDC to be aware, however they make, whatever determination they make, to be aware of the history, like involved in the nitty gritty. So this is, I think, a natural extension of HDC duties, even though it falls under, I think it is I'm not sure why it's under the town bylaw. But that happens in many towns in New York State where there's a bylaw that has to do with lack of occupancy and neglect. And yeah, I think it just goes under the town code because perhaps, Meg, there's a little more teeth in some instances with the town code versus zoning in terms of enforcement, or no?
No, there definitely is,
Yeah, okay,
or at least as I understand it, I think zoning is very difficult to enforce, the process is very lengthy.
yeah.
There's all sorts of appeals that can take place, it could be tied up for ages before there's resolution, so town code is always preferred.
Yeah, and that's why I was actually, when I was thinking of it, one of the questions I wanted to ask, I'm glad you're here, was that one, because in the longer term, does it belong there? And so in my mind, based on my experience with New York State zoning code, it does, or not zoning code, but town versus zoning code, because the town has more, under New York State law, has more teeth.
Maybe health code, they have.
And health
they
the
have
most,
biggest teeth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and fire has a pretty good grip too, but doesn't get involved much. So that's kind of what it is. I don't know how I'm gonna put that into a 3-minute thing, so Sarah doesn't ring the bell on me.
Well, and make it clearer for
What leg do
people.
we have to stand on when this happens? Not much, right?
Well,
When
it's,
what happened?
When a demo by neglect happens,
It's in the special act.
well, we have ability to intercede. That's the other thing, is we have an ability to intercede on a demo by neglect. I don't, look, I think I don't think there's an opening here for people to abuse it. I think it's a matter of creating a fair process so that it is used the way it's intended to be, and it's used the way it's intended to be effectively. And so people have an opportunity to have a fair hearing without having to be dragged into court.
these are very rare on Nantucket, because obviously people have a lot of money, they can
Yeah.
actually maintain
Yeah.
their buildings. So
Yeah,
we're lucky, we don't have to deal with it that often.
Right.
Well, and to that,
But as
yeah.
land gets more scarce, it can be used as a strategy to,
Well, that's the concern I
There's a
have,
house on Atlantic
it
that's
happens in
gonna,
New Jersey a lot.
Yeah.
I heard about it a lot. when I was a
without
kid.
naming it or discussing it, so we don't get in trouble.
so,
Angus?
yeah, just to
Yes.
your point about there not being very many, that it doesn't make any sense, when everything's so valuable, you don't want to have
Mhm.
something falling apart and unusable. So it is relatively rare. And, as some of them come up, you're like, how did this get, this far
Hmm,
without it being addressed?
Right
And
under everybody's
all-
nose, yeah.
all of this is, it might not be as specific as we like, but there's language in the bylaws for the direction of the HDC, which is in charge of this, to do everything that it can to preserve the historic assets of the historic landmark. So, yeah, I mean, I think maybe there have been bigger fish to fry,
Hmm.
and there, some of these things that weren't being brought up that maybe should have, just weren't being addressed. So in a good way, they are being, hopefully they are being addressed. In a bad way, we don't want the vigilante, picking on everybody on every block. And the language it could be tightened up. But at a previous meeting, our discussion was, well, how do we see this? And we basically, using the language of, not compromising the frame or the roof or the foundation or the structure. Sort of a minimum is weather tightness, just so that,
Yeah.
that the structure isn't compromised.
Right.
So, if someone's window breaks, they're gonna fix it because they don't want to they don't wanna ruin their asset, but if a window is missing for a year, you know, that's neglect. Or if the roof is missing.
But then like, sorry, the idea of an engineer. A homeowner hires an engineer and gets the result they want.
Uh-huh.
So that's something that this island really needs, or the town really needs, is its own engineer.
Well, I don't know
to
about
be
that.
able to be-
I
We
mean,
have attorneys, we should be able to have professionals that are working
I-
for,
I
the
think
town as
that
well.
we can I don't wanna go too far into this, but the minimum maintenance standard is something where we have a discussion. We don't have a regulatory authority.
to make determinations.
We're not
using a
that
professional.
party,
Right,
yes,
okay.
so that's not where we can exercise something. Under the HDC Act, we can compel certain specific performance, and it may or may not involve, based on past practices, having an engineer hired,
Mhm.
or compelling a third-party engineer and things along those lines. The minimum maintenance doesn't provide for that. We're
Right,
not
okay.
the regulatory body, and I'm not proposing that we will be, because I think that it muddies it shortens the distance between the special act and the town code in a way that I think is unnecessary, because the HCC has authority already. The other part of it, I want to go back to something Angus said, which I think is very important, is we want to clarify, to me, the minimum maintenance standards is primarily about weather tightness. Because that's how you get into degradation of your structure very quickly, very easily, whether it's the sheathing materials and then the underlying, beams and joists and posts, or down to the foundation, and you're getting, these old foundations that are getting wetted from the inside, from the outside, freezing, thawing, cracking the mortar. The whole building starts to fall apart within, 5 or 10 years if the structure isn't weather tight. So that's one of the elements I do want to work into, just clarifying within the structure that's already been established. So those are the goals. I'm gonna work on this one and get it. At the very least, I want to have something to be presented at town meeting as a concept for discussion. And I'm hoping to have it in front of the select board, even though we're not gonna meet their warrant deadline, which is an arbitrary deadline.
One thought on this is.
Yeah.
I think we're all in the thick of it.
By the way, I like your vest.
I was admiring your vest. I think that might be the same.
I like your best. bet.
We're in the thick of it, so we know that this. That bylaw exists, the demolition by neglect. I'm curious, I'm not looking for an answer, but how many people are actually aware of it? And the reason why I bring it up is that. Not specific to this article and not recently, but on social media, you read derogatory comments about the HDC periodically, right? Right, and I've heard a few of them come up, well, don't you have an HOA? It's the HDC. People that aren't really, and they think that we basically, we tell you what you can do in your yard. We can tell you how to paint it. We can tell you what color to paint your door, and we're an HOA.
And then we go eat bonbons.
Right, and so we don't want the uninformed to think that the HDC is becoming the HOA, and that now island-wide, we're gonna make sure that your house is being painted and your lawns are being mowed. Because I can see people taking some of the superficial things, components of this, and blowing it out of proportion and trying to make it seem like we're gonna be now told by the HDC that we've gotta, but I understand that it's about weather tight shell and it's these extreme
Well,
examples.
the irony is
So-
that the whole reason, or one of the reasons I wanna endeavor to start this process is to prevent that from happening, where people are saying, oh, he didn't paint his house, I'm gonna complain. They're gonna go and look at it, they're gonna see it's not painted, and he's gonna get a ticket to Superior Court.
Yeah.
But it's a
exactly.
good point.
Was like the extreme example of maintenance that I can think of is that house that was on Orange Street that used to get painted annually,
Yeah,
the gloss paint.
yeah.
It was like sort of a joke.
Well, I thought they buffed that out.
No.
I don't know, they
it's
painted that
still like that.
painstakingly, and are they trying to make everybody like that? Just playing devil's advocate for the naysayers,
Yeah.
that wait a minute, we don't wanna, is that an expansion of the HDC's authority and blah, 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 so. I think it just has to do with the delivery of it and how it's
I'm gonna
packaged.
reserve the right to request that Joe stand up at town meeting and explain that part, because I am not gonna be able to get that out in 3 minutes. I talk quickly in deference to people, but that's too
also
much.
assuming the worst of people.
It is,
Which
it
you really
is.
shouldn't do.
It is,
Well,
yeah.
I
Is
mean,
it-
I'm a skeptical optimist. I plan for Shakespeare and over Disney. I mean, like, come on, we've experienced this stuff all the time where people throw landmine, lob grenades.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense and I think it's a good idea, so don't miss it, but don't.
No, I don't. I'd appreciate that's a really interesting perspective, and I think it's valid and it may need to be articulated. And this, I'll just say in closing this out, is this the text is directed specifically at contributing structures,
Oh, I was gonna ask that, okay.
and it's I don't know, I don't think it states in the OHDs because they're contributing structures outside the OHDs. So that's something that's important. There's
That's
a
very.
topic
important.
we would need to address there with the 75 thing, but yeah, I think, this is why I want to get something on paper and then
Yes.
have discussion.
Interesting, okay.
Are there other thoughts on that? I mean, I think I was hoping to get a read of you guys on, does this make sense? Is this something that we think we should be taking on? Holly, comment?
I just wanted to mention that I think it might be important just to treat this as an educational tool, because you bring up some good points, Joe, about, there's people that don't really quite understand what the difference between the special act is and town code, what the authority of the HDC has right now, as well as, I mean, we've seen it, we've had folks that buy a piece of property, a historic structure on Nantucket, get somebody to work on it, and lo and behold, they're putting the wrong type of shingles on the building, so that has happened. It's something I don't think we've seen within, 30 years or whatever, but I think it's all about education and letting people know that the entire island is a historic district, and yes, the HDC has purview over it, and that is about maintaining your structure to be weather tight.
Right,
And on this topic, the last thing I'd say is I do think it's important to get feedback from our professional planning staff on the mechanics of it. I mean, what I'm suggesting, and we're discussing a really simple approach, which I think is beneficial to keep it simple, but if there's a hole in it, they look at more than, they're involved with zoning, Board of Appeals, Planning Board, so it's kind of under the same umbrella in terms of the how the complaint flows through to an end result. And that I will be looking to them to get some input on at some point, because I think it's important that we want to be consistent to the extent we can be with local practices, because whether it's seek forgiveness instead of permission, or it is an ignorance due to the fact that this is an area of information people simply aren't involved in, it's always better to be consistent where you can be across the organization, because that's what people will begin to understand. Holly?
I did want to mention that this specific chapter, chapter 124, has been a topic on planning staff for quite a long time, of something that needs to be looked at. And I did look at it within the last couple of years and actually have some recommendations on how to tweak it, and really looking at it from a link between HDC's special act and town code, if you really think about it, because that's where, when somebody does say not follow a approved COA to the way you all have approved it as, that is our mechanism to go to not only a special act, but also this section of the town bylaw to say you're not following that, because that's where that linkage is, if you will. So it is important of a chapter for us, and it's a chapter that really needs some cleaning up, if you will.
Yeah, and then I think that there may be iterations of this, to my mind. The idea is to get something in and get it on the books, because as people become aware of it, it will become active. So we want it to at least be going down the lane that makes the most sense for the community versus just straight to Superior Court. It may not be being exercised because people aren't aware of it. So if once people become aware of it, they're going to exercise it. So we want to put something in place and then we can perfect it or build on it, is the thought I'm having.
And if it's a truly financial hardship issue that somebody can't afford to fix their roof. If it goes to Superior Court right away, it's not even, so I'm just wondering if there are any resources that the town is ready to be able to help people in that situation.
Well, I don't know, but it's something that I think this is a topic we can explore through the CLG because it's appropriate. Is there grants? Is there
The
now?
Community Foundation, I mean, like, are there
Yeah.
different,
So the Historical Commission has been talking for a number of years, actually, about having a fund for just such situations where people need to make a repair that they can't afford to, just for the preservation of the resource. So that's something that has been in the works. But I wanted to say about the actual filing of the complaint is, and I don't think we're gonna figure this out now, but if you're the neighbor, you might not want to be, the person who brings that forward publicly for, whatever,
If you're
An
gonna
attack
complain
back
about
from-
your neighbor, suck it up.
well, but
Well,
if
that's your
it's an
friend.
issue and no one else
If
has
it's your
seen it.
friend or
Can I,
if
can I,
it's
can I
local
comment though?
or
Because there's another law that trumps this.
Well, the other part is the HTC, neither do we want to be, driving around targeting things and so. If there were a neutral body or a neutral way to bring these situations to light. Without a certain person
Right.
or entity being
But
targeted.
if there was some backup resource help, assistance, that right there is like, we're gonna call you out on this, but we're gonna be able to help you.
Yeah, every stool has three legs,
So
so
there's
we're
like
looking at
that
the
thing
three
too.
legs.
Yeah.
That, who's gonna, who and how do you complain, how do you address it? In a regulatory way, how do you address it in the physical real world? And I think that my hope is that part of getting started on this is we're directing it down the right lane.
Mhm.
With the HTC involvement as a fair and even initial review body. And that the discussion kind of blossoms out from there. Keep in mind too, this isn't like a pervasive thing, but
No.
when it happens,
Yeah.
it'd be good as a community to be able to address it. Very quickly, if a citizen puts in a complaint, it's not Freedom of Information Act protected. So anyone can find out who did what by putting in a FOIA. I'm not, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm just referencing what I'm aware of. The idea of having an independent third party involved, I think is, has merit, but I don't want anyone to be involved until we get this thing squared away. Just because it's wishy-washy, it's not, like, I don't even think it says weather tight in the
No, it doesn't.
language.
It doesn't.
No.
So you have a standard that it's hard to even
There's
enforce if it
no
goes to the
standard.
court of law, so. That's my goal, is to get the standard clarified and then develop the concept more, again, iterations.
Word. Changing the title on that
Yeah,
is
even
the
banks
first
know
thing.
whether tight it.
Well,
That's so
yeah.
Yeah, getting
deceiving.
its own.
When you
Getting
apply
its
for a
own
loan,
section.
that's a milestone. That's
Yeah.
a common term, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, it is for us. but-
Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, just to get it out there, so reuse structured allowance, so this one came up. In conjunction with, our experiences at the HTC, my experiences at the HTC over the last 7+ years. Where someone would come in, they'd have a move off, demo. I always try to say move off demo, not demo move off.
Right.
By the way, words matter. And, they have everything in place, and then they find out that the ground coverage isn't gonna work on the lot that is there. And I think subject to some language that would prevent gaming of the system, so you're not, buying a lot and moving 3 huge structures on it. That there could be allowances for ground coverage.
Yeah.
There could be allowances for setbacks. And it could be in such a way that it follows a accepted review process. So for instance, if the planning board were to support this or the community through a special permit with specific criteria established and also while addressing that, I think it could be tiered. I think it could be, as a matter of a letter. Let's just throw it out there for the sake of discussion. It's hard to discuss stuff without information in front of you, right? Or at least the concept. Let's say
Yeah.
for the sake of discussion, you can get a house on your property, a move off, and it's gonna take you 150 square feet over your ground cover. I don't think that there is a zone in the Nantucket that can absorb 150 square feet. So if it's simply 150 square feet, maybe what is approved and what is in the language under the redevelopment section is that this is an allowance subject to planning board review and approval. And it'd be a letter approval.
What does that mean?
They issue a letter.
Oh, okay.
It's 500 square feet. And you're in, again, I'm just throwing things out there to kind of paint a picture, not to figure out the text of the language. You're in Tom Nevers, your septic can handle it. You've got a, 40,000 square foot lot, and you can get something that's 600 square feet over your ground coverage. Maybe that letter is the same thing there. Now, conversely, you're an R10, which is, pretty much year-round neighborhoods. And you want to go 600 feet over your ground coverage. That's not a letter. That's maybe not even a special permit, but it's more along the lines of a special permit review.
But the idea, sorry, just to clarify, the idea is to try to give the HDC the ability to say,
No,
No,
if you
This
get a
is-
letter.
this is a zone, so
What
this is, okay, wait, I got you. This
Yeah.
is a zoning matter. This isn't an HDC matter. HDC can weigh in on setbacks, massing, as related to character and stuff.
Sorry,
Okay.
but the question, I'm sorry,
I think it
my question's
It
clear.
affects the HDC, I think, to the degree that if we're evaluating a property and we're talking about density of structure, that we're offering some filtered flexibility because it's a
Right, saying
building
this is,
move.
this, to us, it looks like this would be fine. So the idea is they, instead of going through the process of getting a special permit, they just are getting a letter.
Well, first of all,
So,
you
I
can't,
don't
no, well,
quite
wait,
get-
hold on a second. You can't actually get a letter to change, you can't currently get a letter or a special permit to change your ground coverage. There's only certain conditions under which, and they're very limited, that you can change ground coverage on your lot to get greater, and I believe it involves a variance through the ZBA.
yeah,
So this opens up an opportunity to streamline a process through the authority, having jurisdiction being the planning board, which is the most appropriate authority,
mhm,
to get a letter, perhaps, in certain situations that have a limited high end, or a special permit if there's more involved, so neighbors can be involved, in order that a home can be repurposed, because that's the direction the community sentiment has strongly gone to, is reusing these structures.
and this doesn't already exist?
No.
no.
Ah, it doesn't.
The interesting thing, though, is that if somebody came to
Okay,
us
so that's-
and they wanted to move a 1,500 square foot house to their lot, I'll use my lot as an example. 2 acre lot, I have 900 square feet of ground cover available,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna move a 1,500 square foot house there. And in Tom Nevers, you wouldn't even notice it. The HDC doesn't look at the ground. They just, we're evaluating things purely from does it fit the context? Does it fit the neighborhood? Whether or not it's over ground cover, I wouldn't say is completely irrelevant, but we're not looking at the minutia of it.
Right,
So we could grant somebody an approval already for a building that exceeds ground cover to move.
yeah,
They
But
can't-
then they can't move it.
Under zoning, they can't move it. So this is the zoning component of allowances for the reuse. The title is
but they- yeah.
reuse structure allowances.
So it's just allowing them to apply for a special permit to be able to,
It's allowing
for a
them,
letter.
no, it's allowing them to, it's to allow either by, well, hold on a second,
I-
listen. I know, but you're getting a little skeptical already,
No,
and I
I'm
just
not
want to give you
skeptical, I'm
information.
just antsy to hear the answer.
Okay, but I gotta say it.
Hurry up.
There will be a series of tiers, or at least two tiers. One would be a letter form. It would allow for the purpose of discussion, you to get additional square footage. If you're reusing a structure. If you're going above that, you would need a special permit. Now, it's not just for additional ground coverage. It may also include relief from setbacks. Because what if you have a property and the places will fit because you have septic and you have a well and you have a house? It will totally fit in your yard and it's this cute little cottage, but the only place it's gonna fit, and it's only 600 square feet.
Right.
But the only place it will fit is with that will work because of other factors on the site, is in one of the setbacks has to be violated by, would have to be violated by a foot. So the concept is to try and build in for the planning board, for the community to make allowances for the reuse of structures with respect to ground coverage and setbacks.
Right.
That way, when
And
an applicant
speed.
comes to the HDC they wanna move off a structure. The community presumably would feel like there's actually now some flexibility in terms, instead of looking at it black and white, oh, it's 900 square feet, we're only allowed 800, it's going to the dump. But now we could let the community know, this is 800 square feet, you know, the zoning bylaw might now allow some flexibility. So it doesn't affect us directly, except that.
No, but everybody hopes that people will reuse and
Yeah.
recycle, so everybody
Yeah.
can sort of get on board.
Well, everybody wants people to reuse and recycle, but it's easy to say to do that, but there's mechanics
The
involved. We're trying to
logistics are
deal with the
really hard, the
mechanics.
speed in which this thing happens.
Well,
is the other
that's
thing.
gonna be my
It's like
point. I have
balances and
an example of something like this happening, helping someone move a house. And we have to take a section off,
Mm.
which
Because it won't fit.
creates another situation, you know, to make it fit. So
Mhm.
this, I think, is great. For me, my question always is with moves. The expeditious manner that it can go through the process, and if this is gonna throw. I'm unclear, the letter would be something the office could do, wouldn't have to go to a meeting.
To expedite it.
Well, it would be,
Because if you have to sometimes go through a meeting, then the people who wanna get rid of it are like,
Okay, that's too long, I'm not waiting that long.
so this
But
isn't
that goes
something,
hand in hand with the,
yeah, so
other
I,
thing.
there's another component of this, which I'll talk
Delay.
about in a couple of minutes, once we get through the concept stuff about how to bring this about, and that involves planning staff. But I think for purposes of our discussion, yes, part of the solution here is expediting the regulatory aspect. So a letter form, maybe the planning board reviews this and says, this is cut and dry. If it meets X, Y, and Z, staff can issue this.
Yeah.
Or like, not even like a consent thing, or maybe not. Maybe the law is that the planning board has to vote on it. I don't know, but those are topics I won't need to sit down, and that's why it's not gonna be a fully formed article at town meeting this year, because I'll get into that in a few minutes. But these are the types of things that need to be resolved so that this is legally tenable, fully functional, out the door, and allows for people to accomplish what they need to accomplish in the regulatory timelines that exist in relation to a move off already.
I love it,
Other
cause it
than-
gives so much more flexibility for somebody to take a building.
Yeah.
it does indeed, the unintended consequences of who goes first, the HDC or the planning board. If the planning board goes first and say, oh yeah, you can do this, it's 500 square feet over your ground cover, but that's fine, we want you to reuse the building. Then they come to the HDC and the HDC sees that this is completely inappropriate to add this extra square footage because it's just like, it just doesn't, yeah, it just doesn't.
There's no unintended
work.
consequence, there's no difference than what
So,
happens
It would
currently.
need to,
No, the HDC says this is appropriate or it's not. You can build a brand new house underground, under current zoning. This is no different.
right, but often
Because
when
you
you
will-
get, like, if you get the Concom to approve something.
That comes
It
down to
gives you a
discipline of the
little bit
respective
more.
boards to say, look, you come in, But Carrie, you present a question about a problem and then you say, well, that's how it works. No,
No, it's not how it works. It's sometimes things slip through. So
The-
I'm just saying.
the answer is-
Unintended consequences would be, I think, for HDC to see it first.
no, I think
No?
that personally, the answer to the problem you pose, and then Holly, is discipline of the board.
Okay.
Self-discipline. This is something that we review based upon our guidelines and rules and regulations. And it passes on those merits. It doesn't pass on whether the Concom already approved it, or whether the planning board already approved it, or God stamped it with his left hand. Like, this is not what the HCC does.
Right.
Well, the interesting thing that it brings up in terms of being expeditious, and then I guess the order by which an applicant would pursue this
Mhm.
makes me think, do you prioritize at the HDC meetings, move demos?
Yes.
They're all at the beginning of the meeting, and they just get taken care of one after another so that people aren't lagging and you lose a month because of the process.
All hand in hand, which is
Yeah,
great.
which I think would be
Really
fine,
good.
you know. Just a simple.
Oh, Holly's been patient.
Thank
and
you.
Megan, are you good with?
I just wanted
You were
to
like-
Carrie's question, if this is something that could be flushed out and go to town meeting and the planning board is wanting to accept it, I could see it being done as like they do for secondary dwellings. There's a letter, it's something.
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Angus, and just Meg,
I would say, and I would probably want to run this by town council if it were to move forward, to that point, at a future town meeting, but my gut is telling me it might need to be a bit more stringent than that, just because you're dealing with ground cover overages and, as you're transferring property, you want to have all that stuff cleared up. So you'd want a record actually attached to the title, where that would be allowed. So not to say it can't be done, but I think it may need to be done through a bit more of a formal process.
or
And
at least attached to the title in form, and then if they move forward, then they registered it at the registry of deeds.
right, like there has to be some sort of additional, more formal mechanism for that. And I wonder too, if this whole conversation, when we revive our height work group, if it may all kind of.
That's my next.
Yeah, okay,
Oh,
sorry.
oh.
I jumped
No,
on
it's fine.
that.
That's-
Like,
It's not on our
technically-
list for today.
No,
I was
but that's-
curious, cause I
that's
thought
nice.
I was wondering if that's where this was going, that.
Yeah.
That if you just actually change the way ground cover is approached and it's layered based on height,
Or.
Well, that's the other thing.
Well,
then.
So hold on a
Everywhere
minute,
else
hold on a minute, hold on a minute. Angus has Angus has patiently had his hand up over here, so. get
I
on.
put my hand up 3
And
times.
then you're next. Or
Um,
chickens.
Okay, so my take on it is knee-jerk reaction for community and for the boards and pretty much everybody involved is make it as easy as possible to make use of the structures that are getting moved that would otherwise be timid. That's on the back end, but the front end is. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like there's a lot more demo moved than there ever has been.
Mhm.
And we're facing overdevelopment already, so why are we giving concessions to people getting a little even more space than zoning says? And is there something that we can do to stem the tide of all these structures not getting worked with? I grew up here with, you make do with what there was. There wasn't like this onslaught of like any lot, any house, old house, new house, any lot is basically treated as a location and a lot and do whatever you feel like. And of course, the HTC is not saying do whatever you feel, but I do feel like there's more now than there ever has been of not making use of the existing structures in in the design and change and alterations.
Mhm.
So I think that it's as important as it is to look at making it easier for buildings to not go into the dump. I think that starts on the front end of not sending them to the dump.
Yeah, not dumping them in the first place.
I'm gonna swing back to that after we get to Vail, because there is another component of this, which is. In my mind, being forward-looking, which is why I'm putting this,
Right.
initiated this.
Well, I'm also thinking this is also gonna create now the 20% difference. Do we, and that's a zoning thing
Mm.
between first and second building. Would there have to be relief from that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something to think about. I love the idea of coming up with something to keep structures from going in the dump. It drives me crazy. I don't know that we can tell people, no, you can't move anything, unless it's a historic structure.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll address that.
But you know what we could do? We could put them on barges and we could have a liveaboard
Dormitory.
community.
That's like Jerry said, he said, let's have some
Or outside
cruise
something.
ships off, offshore for people to live in, to come to work.
I just wanna caution you that the HCC will have no purview over cruise ships.
But they'd provide a lot
But
of
in the harbor
housing
they
for a
would.
lot of people.
So, a couple of quick things. One, yes, in part, this is I wouldn't call it a knee-jerk reaction. It's a forward-looking, solution-oriented concept to address sentiment within the community, which is palpable, which is reuse. And it is also the fact that, I have property rights, and unless it's, as Holly said, a historic home, the HDC certainly has little to stand on. And the town has, I dare say, kind of paltry coffers compared to some people who want to take down their $7 million home that's already been constructed when they bought the land, and they want to move it to the lot next door and put up their own design because, for instance, they like, the living room concept space better. And that's not far off of what's actually literally happening right now. The other idea about this is being forward-looking is this is a potential opportunity, and it can be worked into the mix, which I'm gonna get into next, is in solving some of our. I coined a phrase, attainable housing, many years ago on the floor of the select board meeting. And I'm glad to see it's actually being turned into a definition in the zoning bylaw. But attainable housing, like this could be, there may be that you don't get 600 square feet unless this is for attainable housing or workforce housing or something else. Like, this isn't just about redevelopment, making it easier. And I'm not suggesting you're suggesting that, but this is about trying to look holistically at what are the market drivers, which drive many of our issues. And that includes a significant amount of money, highly disposable money. In a sense, I mean, it's being put into an investment, but it's like money that is, it's extreme amounts of money. That are used in some ways that people would think is disposable. Like, I wouldn't be spending for instance, I wouldn't be personally spending money to relocate a house that hasn't even been completed yet, that probably on the build side was $2.5 or $3 million easily. But that's not me, and I'm trying to be responsive to the reality of the situation, not what I want it to be. So part of it is we have these materials that are otherwise going to go to the landfill. How do we use them? This is a simpler solution than coming up with a yard to store materials until people can go and go to the used materials warehouse, which is a great idea, but doesn't exist. This can actually be put into place within a year if it gets voted in a town meeting. So the ideas are, as we talked about, there'll be more ideas. The ideas we talked about today will change. It's more about getting the concept out there to see if there's an appetite for it.
What about making, if you wanna move something off or demo it, you have to pay for that to happen. If you wanna, and somebody wants it, you have to help them pay for it,
Well,
if you wanna get rid of it.
I can't speak to that. I'm not an attorney.
Paying to deconstruct it carefully so people can take the materials. That to me sounds like a no. burning.
I don't know, but I don't believe the town can legislate that you have to pay to dismantle something. They may, well, please hear me out. They
Okay.
may be able to say, we have a finite landfill and we have services associated with landfill services. And in these instances, if it is actually proven factual to have a higher level of cost for the town, they could, under an enterprise account, they can only charge for the service, the cost for the services. So there is a cap even on that. Like, look, something like that would be tied up in lawsuits for years. It's not a win. It sounds good and we can talk about it, but it's not gonna
I
happen.
was
I feel
thinking
like
of it as a
other places
deterrent
have
to
stuff
make
like
people
this,
wanna
and
work
for
with
some reason, I
something.
don't know why Nantucket doesn't.
Meg,
I don't know
The
why.
state of Massachusetts is not allowed to charge development impact fees.
yeah,
And coincidentally, I brought up, I hope this isn't your office, but with the agenda. Through the seasonal communities advisory, so we haven't formally began to meet, but we have kind of stakeholder work groups that we talk to on the side. And that was a suggestion I brought up, why not be able to assess those fees? Because I think, seasonal communities are impacted differently than perhaps elsewhere.
but the important distinction, the takeaway on this is that the fees need to be consistent with the cost to the municipality. So dismantling a house and cataloging it and having the materials there and assuming the liability for people to come on your property and take materials away and so on and so forth. I'm having a difficult time being in construction, as you guys have been, seeing where the cost to do that can be, if the end result is we want to do that by charging people a fee because the alternative is a fee that's too prohibitive, please let me finish.
Yeah. sorry.
You're not gonna get there. Because you can't charge, I don't believe we can charge whatever we're charging. What's the cost now for C&D? Certain amount of ton. That's the
Right,
top of it.
That's my point, like, it's a matter of, like, education. You're gonna be spending 200 grand to dump this house. Or you could pay your contractor 200 grand to take it apart and give it away, or sell it, or give it away to people who then want to use it to build their homes here that can't afford materials. Like, it's almost just like a huge campaign that needs to happen.
Well, the other thing
Educate
too
people.
is just as we're, needing to deal with global warming and rising seas and sustainability and resilience, this is a sustainability issue. And for decades, I've been saying Nantucket, has the luxury of waste. But that was about 1-year-old furniture when it could last 15-year-old, and just bringing it to the dump. Or, just dumping food, dumping cars, dumping things. But now it's dumping houses. And at some point, there should be some sort of regulation to
Say no.
motivate people not to have that scale of waste at any price. But there was one other thing.
NPT, with
Common good.
remain funds, did a study on deconstruction. That's pretty much where you're going.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, that would be something to look at. There's other jurisdictions in the country, Texas, what have you. All
Savannah.
different places, Savannah, exactly. And those people have actually come to Nantucket and spoken
Love
to quite a different people,
Mhm.
both on the nonprofit side as well as the town side. I know we're kind of derailing, but I think the topic of deconstruction came up, and it's something it's out there to talk
And-
about and figure out.
And it's not that far.
When was that study conducted?
A couple of years ago,
I think it was
not that long ago.
3.5 years ago.
But it's on NPT's website.
And it's not that far off between just throwing it out versus the dismantling and distribution of it. But the other thing I was thinking about was fees in the town and services. Is that our HDC fees are just
Okay,
a drop in the.
we're definitely going
No,
off
but
topic.
but
guys.
the
I
just
know,
a
and I
drop
gotta
in the
get going,
bucket for
so-
the amount of work and staff that's required to process these applications. So that's just, something that's attached
Yeah.
to the HDC, but
Yeah.
the town in general, what we're taxed with for these projects.
So I don't think anyone questions the utility of a well-functioning deconstruction program and having that up and running 365 for the next 20 years. However, it's not what we're talking about today. It's not something that's gonna happen as quickly as having an article that, if it's supported by town, will allow structures to stop going to the landfill. We're talking about that today.
Yeah, it's step one.
Yeah, step one. But I don't think any of these are the solution. It's a cumulative effort. It's gonna take the community. The HDC is not gonna be, to my mind, because we are a regulatory authority who review applications for construction. We are not the driving force to get the select board or other policy leaders who make the decisions and allocate the funds to come up with a deconstruction program. It's not gonna be us. So we can talk about it, but I would prefer that we don't if we're gonna focus on solutions that we can be involved in implementing, as the HDC, and in this instance, it's more to get feedback from HDC members because you all are involved with move-off demos. I'd like to kind of focus on those for the purposes of today. I don't mean to be a wet towel. I think these are all really great. It's just, that study's been on the shelf for 3 years and it makes a lot of sense, but it also costs a lot of money to have land somewhere to warehouse materials. It's, and
everything comes down to cost.
yeah, and it's unfortunate, but that's the reality we live in when people have to work 3 jobs to live on the island. I did hope to get a little more out of you guys on the particulars of the article, but I think the idea, concepts, but I think the idea there is next step, which is we have long been talking about, I brought this up, rewarding decrease in height with additional square footage. Angus brings up a good point. Are we rewarding, or could bring up a good point, are we rewarding development? My comments on that by increasing square footage is an HTC goal in Cisco 20 years ago, and I think a laudable goal would have been to assess this type of a solution and award an extra 15% ground coverage if you build a certain amount under. Do you think that the structures in Cisco that are 2 stories are that is appropriate for there?
1,500 square foot boxes times
Yeah,
2.
it's
But
horrible.
also asking people to apply for something taller just so they can get the,
Yeah, but
ground
if the
coverage.
end result is you win, what does it matter?
well, it matters because I think I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, I remember a decade plus ago where we wouldn't even try to apply for a building that was
But
more
Mary,
than 28
what
feet
that
tall,
ignores is the
because
reality of the
HTC
economy.
would shoot you down.
It ignores the reality of the economy.
Yeah, but that argument bums me out. It's just
It
like,
bums me out too,
I know,
girl,
but
but
why
it's
do we have-
reality.
Can we go to the
but
next
it's a
thing? 'Cause I
non-reality
wanna
when
hear
you
what
think
that
of what the
is.
HTC's powers are. We can tell people, no, 28 feet is your max height. We don't have to say yes to 30 feet if it's
Yeah,
not appropriate.
Carrie, I'm done fighting
So-
that fight as the chair. I have
Right.
sat there
No,
for,
But we
and
can do that.
I
But so
understand
then, but
we
why
can.
would we give ground cover?
Carrie,
That's my
because
question.
we don't,
Huh?
because we don't do that. Drive down Hill Point,
We don't give.
drive down Hill Point Road.
What, I don't quite get what you're saying.
You just said the
There's-
HDC can control the height. We don't.
they used to.
I understand that, but you're ignoring the reality. We don't.
Right, so let's get back to
Well,
doing it. Let's start saying,
Okay, that's a conversation for another time. I
Yeah.
really gotta go.
sorry.
I'm trying to take real world stuff and
You
put it
said
into
there was
effect.
Something that was coming up about the height, that there
The
was.
point was that,
That was just it, a horse trade, ground
No.
cover for height.
no, the point was, as so often happens, you can't get through to the point you're trying to make. The concept of rewarding 1-story construction by increasing your ground coverage is tied in with the concept of in some ways, with the concept of the reused structure allowances. And it ties in with the concept of the height restriction and using cubic volumes to help determine what is acceptable height and what isn't acceptable height. Because if, for instance, it serves the community and the historic district to have 35 feet, but only 30% of the structure, and the remaining structure needs to be a percentage mix of 20 feet and 15 feet in order to encourage additive massing. So that's a discussion that we're having within the height
With
restriction.
regard to big complexes.
Right.
Right.
Because
So some
all,
neighborhood associations already have those
Yeah, to
talk
calculations
about.
that you can do.
right, because the
minimize
reality
the ridge height.
is that what happens at HTC by death by 1,000 cuts and all other factors that are involved is the dollar drive, the economy of construction and use of a structure, maximizing the usable square footage drives the final product. And we end up with these large structures that are more than we would like.
And they wrap porches around.
Right, and if the HDC is not going to, and the HDC, and it's not this HDC only, it's HDCs for the last 2 decades, go drive through Cisco, go drive down Hill Point, and you'll see what I'm talking about, are allowing these huge structures to be built. Well, then I'm just trying to come up with potentially, for discussion purposes, another solution that incentivizes people to do it the way the community, the historic guidelines, rural guidelines direct it to be done.
Right.
I mean, I may be
It's a
barking up
great
the wrong tree, but
concept, But
it's
the
just-
idea that you're allowing now more on the ground is not so great.
Yeah,
Because
but
everybody's
more on the-
putting more on the
more
ground
on the
as it is.
ground.
Pools,
but
patios, tennis courts.
More on the ground might not be. It could very well be less unsightly, if that makes.
Yeah,
It might not even
absolutely.
be insight.
It might not be
It
insight,
absolutely
so.
could.
Think
but-
about Tom Nevers.
So you have certain zones where you can do it.
Think
because
about,
other
of
zones,
course,
it's
yeah,
too
yeah, I'm
small
not, yeah,
to do
I
it.
mean, exactly, but think about Tom Nevers. 30 years ago, you got a 50% increase in ground coverage if none of it was visible. That would be a completely different area of the island right now.
Right, I live in Tom Nevers, everybody's undersized lot,
No, but it's all about the views. You
1,500
gotta get
square
up high
feet,
to
2
see the
stories.
views. So they would do
You
it
just
no matter what.
defined the reality of
Yeah.
why you need to incentivize people to do something else, because it makes more economic sense for them. Therefore, they will do it. They might do a trade-off on the views
Right.
because it's better for them in terms of the
Or we
economy.
could just give a
What?
max height for any building.
Okay,
20.
What, I think what's gonna incentivize people the most is if the HTC toes the line of saying no to things that are inappropriate. We can't just be like, oh, this is the only way they're gonna get square footage. There was a project that we reviewed not too long ago that, that we were happy with the scale and the design, and that a comment came in, a week later where they wanted to change because they couldn't get the square footage that they wanted in the basement. So everyone said, oh yeah, fine, go ahead and put the dormer that we didn't, want in the beginning, because they weren't able to get the square. That had nothing to do with it, but we made that concession. And I think we just need to, follow the guidelines a little bit better.
yeah, I think, it's an interesting discussion. Asserting more backbone at the HTC is something I've long contended is necessary, including myself, but that's not what we're gonna accomplish.
Cottage colony.
The idea that reuse structure allowance is something that we're gonna roll into discussions on the other topics with respect to height and cubic volume. Oh, my goodness. Cottage colony thankfully is a very, well, I know, but it's just, it puts something to paper. We can talk about stuff, like I'd love to sit out the Chardonnay or the Cabernet and have some discussions. Val, please, let me.
We don't
please
have
finish.
enough of these. We need more.
No, we don't,
this
because we
happens.
can have these discussions, but it's a form of mental masturbation. We don't get anywhere. It's not, I'm not obviously
I
talking
think
about in a
we
sexual
will
manner.
get
It is like
places.
we're stroking our minds and our empathy and our sympathy for the community, but we're not actually coming with solutions questions because we're not oriented towards coming out with a down and having this, because if we're having a brainstorming session, that's one thing, but that's not what this was billed as. I understand, Carrie, but there's a time and a place. So if the agenda says brainstorming, it's brainstorming. If it doesn't say brainstorming, if it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then that's what the agenda
Okay,
is.
let's do a brainstorming one next
Okay,
and get some.
don't
points in.
disagree with you on that.
Okay.
Now we are thankfully just gonna be talking about one topic with respect to the cottage colonies. I'm gonna ask Meg to please introduce the concept of the cottage colonies. And then we're gonna talk about what the HCC may, I'm gonna make a couple of comments on why this is on the agenda. And then we can have some discussion.
Oh, this is
Is
so
this like
exciting.
the
Let's hear about it.
Oh.
Like the Surfside? Is that a cottage colony?
No, it's
Listen.
cottage community, it is visually, you can think of Monomoy Village, and that's kind of what we had in mind. It is an allowance for additional dwelling units beyond what zoning currently prescribes for. But you cannot get an increase in ground cover, so you're gonna have to work within those confines of, whatever the other regulations are, so ground cover, setbacks, Concom, septic, well, all of those things, so there's no workaround for that, so the intent is small scale, multiple units, they must be owner occupied, therefore attainable housing, so for year-round people making at or below 240% AMI, which is roughly 300 and some odd thousand, I believe, for a family of 4, last calculation, don't quote me on that.
Those are so
but-
confusing.
So it's a higher threshold, so it's really meant to create ownership opportunities for all year rounders, but also capturing, that missing population that maybe needs too much money to qualify for any sort of affordable housing program, but doesn't make enough money to actually enter into the market rate. So the point is so it'll be by special permit through the planning board. It'll have all engineering, site plan review for the infrastructure. The intent is to have single access, cluster the homes with shared parking and large open space. There's a provision that has a height limitation of 24 feet, just because you may have multiple units, but you can get a waiver if there are existing structures on the property. I think that captures most of the.
I love it.
Wow, thank you.
The
That does
concept,
sound good. I wonder how many properties out here are sort of amenable
Right.
to these kinds of developments.
Yeah, so it would
Interesting to
apply
know.
as currently drafted. It would apply to any residential zoning district. You have to, your lot, in order to pursue this special permit option, your lot has to be of conforming size, so you can't have an undersized lot to move this forward.
and go ahead with questions to Carrie, or to Megan, if they're.
I'm in full support. I feel like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Underhill cottages out in Wisconsin, but I mean, at the time, it was just like looked at as a trailer park because everyone was doing big and Victorian and these very simple, they're all approximately 1,000 square feet huddled together, no taller than 15, 16 feet per, and they have lofts and they are clustered together in such an efficient way where everybody gets light and a certain amount of privacy. But that's not a model that is being used, I think, at all. And I think that it should be used a lot. It just makes sense on so many.
They wouldn't meet the
levels.
code now, though, would they?
Yeah,
Remember when Val and Steve Young did that with Young's Way?
Yeah,
They did their own little development of small developments. That was brilliant. And they're not on small lots either. They're on their own good sized lots, but isn't that guy, wasn't he doing that at a special town meeting in the Surfside?
yeah, but this is
Overall,
different because this is
What's it
not,
called?
Isn't a zoning map change?
yeah, this is a concept of implementation by special permit in zones on a distributed model. So you could do this on a lot in an existing neighborhood that has an existing home, and you could create 3 dwellings, but you can't create more ground coverage than would be allowed anyways. That was a specific subdivision
Okay.
right
Okay,
article to do density in that location.
I see.
The reason I wanted to talk about this one was I got some questions on the height. And in conjunction with the cubic volume and in conjunction with the discussions we've been having and the discipline that I hope that we as HDC commissioners can exert. If the height allowance is 24 feet, what will typically happen is you will get 24-foot tall structures that have a porch wrapped around them. And so I wanted to get feedback on, first of all, I wanted to make sure that if this is supported, the planning board's aware of it. Because the HDC is the group that is really gonna take this and have to address the aesthetic effect of this, if this is implemented. I think it's a great article, first of all. I think it can help. There's a whole bunch of things I'll be saying at town meeting on this as an individual, but I think what I wanted to get feedback from you guys on was, one, do we support it? And two, are we concerned about the height? And three, if we are concerned about height, because we're a little concerned we're not gonna be exercising discipline ourselves or future HDC commissions, do we wanna ask for it to be lower or for it to be 24 feet, but no more than 60% of the volume? So that's part one, and I won't get into part two until we have some discussion. Bill?
What, they don't all have to be the same exact house. And
Yeah.
maybe there's a mix. I mean, I know the Monomoy Village, they're pretty much all the same, but they're little ranch boxes.
That's gonna be up to us.
Yeah,
so.
that'll be.
No, I know, but I don't think 24 feet is egregious in terms of height. It's just
It is.
making it sort of a mix, so it's not like
And there's,
Stepford.
maybe
Yeah.
just put some language in
It's
there
not like
saying
Richmond.
24-foot height max with a range of ridge height.
That would be my
Not
point,
allowed
is that
to
you
all
don't
be the
want
same.
Richmond where every house is.
Yeah, that's
24
what's gonna
feet
happen.
For a maximum footprint.
And I can tell you how we got to 24 feet, so, I think it was Chris Magna or Doug Carlson, but, you know, building
Oh,
this
for-
model, yeah, we have to assume modular will be a
Yeah.
component for anyone who's gonna develop this, and, he
You can
said
do
from
single-story
a,
modular.
yeah, modular standpoint, a story and a half would, you know,
Yeah.
that would be 24 feet,
Yeah.
from his
It
perspective.
reminds me of a cluster subdivision, like Aurora Way. I worked on that years ago with Gary Wynn and helped
We've
him
done a lot of those.
work
yeah.
on those guidelines. And as a developer, he wanted to, not to speak his praises, but on that particular one, it was very challenging. You know, 40% could be whatever the maximum height is, and then the remaining 60% had to be between this, and it created a series of step volumes. I think the review of it internally ended up breaking down, and some of the houses deviate from it, but Tatakamo has the same thing. X percentage can be the maximum height, and then there's three tiers, and it forces single-story massing. Incidentally, Dreamline did that house,
Yeah.
which had open single, 50% of the footprint is all single story, and it was all modular, and it's all vaulted space. And then the two-story part, I think, was 25 feet or something, also modular. And they did a great job, and I think having a varied height would be awesome. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with every house maximum height, the scenario you just described.
And I think two things result. One is you don't, in the long term, you'll just bear with me. Yes. Two, buried height restrictions codified, whether it's a homeowner, typically I've seen these in homeowner associations, community associations, which we used to manage on island and off island. Those are very successful because it then it gives the design review group, who are typically homeowners, who know everyone else. Gee, these are the guidelines. These are what you have to work within. And that's number one. It's not the most important part, but it does come into play at the HDC where we allow things to happen that I don't think necessarily we should. Like Eel Point Road and Cisco. And it gives it lays the groundwork quite literally for diversification of ridge heights, and then that fosters what is ultimately in the long term found to be acceptable, which are structures that are designed not with the only consideration being maximization of the square footage on a 1-story, 2-story, 24 height ridge basis, but on a 40% of the volume can be the maximum height, and the other 60% needs to be less by, I don't know, 25% or more. 50% of less is 25% less, 50% of that is 25% less than that. How you word it is a whole nother
But
thing.
there should be language in this thing that
Well,
describes some limitations on not doing a consistent.
Right, and now-
24-foot high ridge height.
The benefit of that is you end up more with structures that are typical of these types of development on Nantucket versus Soviet block buildings, which are 24-foot tall, 12 pitch, huge rectangular structures, which people, in 10 years, people are gonna be like, what were they thinking when they passed this, if that's what we end up with? That's my concern. And what I would like to suggest is a couple of things. One is that what we're looking for is more like the Underhill. There is an inherent value in the architecture. There is inherent value in the use of the architecture when it's maximized because you can rent it. But there is an inherent value also in the aesthetic. And I think you can't legislate the final product. You can regulate it, but the legislation can help come up with a final product that has aesthetic value by incorporating some height, cubic volume based restrictions. That's a suggestion. It's been talked about before. This isn't anything new, but that's why I wanted to bring it up in terms of the cottage communities, because if this happens, I think it could be super successful. Think of Monomoy Village. Here's an example where they are all primarily one ridge height. They're 18 feet.
Well, that's because they're tiny.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
some of these, if you're on a R10 lot, these aren't gonna be, if you
Right.
say 24 feet, you're gonna have 2-story structures. And you're gonna have row houses. And if that's what we want as a community, then that's what we're gonna get, except for they're gonna be separated because they have to have a minimum of 5 feet separation.
People forget that modular houses can be built with dormers, they can be built with low ceiling, with low top plates and, bigger roofs with lots of space upstairs. I mean, it's just that it just takes a little imagination.
One of these houses you
So-
can frame in a weekend. I mean, you don't need to do
Well,
modular.
that's it. The smaller the house,
true.
the easier and quicker and cheaper it is, but
The other concept is that, the idea is, the Broadway area. In Wisconsin, those cottages. So one Broadway. Beautiful example of a 2-story structure that has uber character. And if you had a small community of these, where the text of the language of the bylaw encourages differences in heights, that then helps the HDC, help the applicant design something, whereas otherwise, we're just gonna get boxes that are 24-foot tall ridges, front to back, side to side.
yeah, no, so.
Lastly on this, what I was thinking is, we would ask for some help to see if the planning board would support that concept of cubic volume maximum, and Joe's got experience with this, and
Formula.
Joe Topperman, Nat and Val and Meg and I have been talking about this at length with the height restriction, so I think it's something we could just quickly put together. It can always be modified in the future. The other thing I want to do, and this is why it's important that we are not designing at the table at the HGC and we're trying to be more efficient with our time, is to free ourselves up. And I'd like to come up with cottage communities. HDC guidelines.
Yep.
So that to correspond with the longest town meeting, so that people understand that if they're doing this, there are guidelines that the HCC is going to be following. This is to encourage development of cottage communities, or to require development of cottage communities consistent with such as exists that Monomoy Village. The Broadway, the medium to not too big size cottages on Broadway and the Underhill cottages and things like that. So I wanted to get that out there and get feedback from you guys.
Underhill cottages were actually based on
Broadway.
Broadway, all those structures, all the whale houses. So that concept of mimicking historic structures has already happened, so it'd be awesome to see this.
Yeah.
Kind of go that direction.
And just as you all were talking, is that, the lower it is, the more you can have them all, like, all three streets of the Underhills are all the same height. But they all work together because they're relatively small, just as Broadway does, and Monomoy Village, so, the higher it goes, I think the more you have to get into form-based zoning. As opposed to just to set the limit and, it is what people try to get away with as much as they can.
Well, just like the fact
yeah.
that there's the primary dwelling, secondary dwelling, and tertiary dwelling, the primary and secondary have to be 20% different in size. And then the tertiary has a very minimal ground cover or even habitable space that you can use. So, I mean, just using that as an example, in one of these, you sort of do that formulaic, there can be 2 at this scale and there can be, the percentage of how many ever more have to be this much less.
I think the cubic volume of the ridges is the simplest approach.
However it works.
Yeah.
Like in the simplest, but.
Because otherwise you
lay it
create a
out.
disparity in these small structures that could be,
But
it's
just to lay
gonna
it
harder
out,
to
lay
regulate.
out the language to do some limiting,
Well, that's what's being proposed.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
good.
proposing to you. Do we support something like that?
Totally.
Yes.
In order to bring that to the planning board at this point, pretty quickly, and because we think it's important, and I don't wanna do this isn't in a, oh, we're putting them in this spot. I wanna do it as a, hey, we looked at this, we discussed it, we've had discussions at length in the past, so this isn't a new concept to us. And we wanna see if we can
And
get
it's
this.
a great
developed.
idea, let's work on it.
Meg,
No, I was just gonna say this feedback is great. The planning board is having their public hearing, at least their first public hearing on this on Thursday, the 23rd, 4 o'clock, so it's hybrid. And I think, if you all, as the HTC, I think it's very important to include your commentary. Maybe through a memo, we can include that, or if anyone wants to participate in the public hearing, that would be great as well.
and maybe I will attend and support the concept of the cubic volume and ridge heights and. No, without naming a formula. Like
If
we
it's
can
a
sit
single,
down.
I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
I said, if it's a single ridge height, I agree with what Angus just said, 100%. It's gotta be such that architects and realtors, and I'm an architect, aren't out there trying to figure out how much they can pack. We can do floor thickness of 6 inches and we can build it up, whatever it's gonna be 2 stories. No, it's all 1 story. Then I agree with you. They can be more homogeneous or regular in height, or it's.
But your preference is not that they're homogeneous.
Yeah, I think some height variation. I mean.
So codify that.
Yeah, and I don't wanna complicate it with like if somebody elected to do a building that's only 14 feet high, well, maybe they get 1,200 square feet on the ground, where the person that wants to do 22 feet high only gets
I
800 square feet on the ground.
would suggest,
That's
with-
where I would go,
I would
but-
suggest with cottage communities, and I'm right there with you, is that's version 2 at a future town meeting, is the cubics. Hey, look, folks, this is working. We can encourage more of this if people can get a little more ground coverage. They're gonna build lower, it's gonna have a lower
I
visual
love the
impact.
idea. It's another part of the zoning.
I'll say it
I
did
gotta
have
run.
a,
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Angus.
okay, it did have initially built in a ground cover bonus, if you remember the height, I think was to 18 feet. And just taking in some feedback through people, I just felt it was complicated things, because it's already a brand new concept. and,
People hear
yeah.
more ground cover,
But
they say.
Yeah,
bottom line
and
is
No.
HTC has
So we
the,
just got rid of that.
sorry, bottom line is HTC has the power to refuse
Yeah.
a development that's all 24 feet. If
Yeah.
you say,
Oh, yeah.
this is so
Gary.
wrong,
Carrie, that's an empty suit argument.
so.
Look at Richmond. Come on, like, let's look
They're
at
all the same.
reality
It
here.
just gets.
They're all the same and they have a porch wrapped around them.
Then put that in the language.
That's what I'm suggesting. That's why we're talking
Right.
about this,
But
is
so,
we're
but if
trying
it
to
gets too
codify it.
complicated to do what Megan was saying.
Megan
then
is saying
just
something different.
simplify it and
Megan,
Just
no,
say,
no. Megan is saying
okay.
something different.
okay.
No, listen, because you're not hearing what she said. She's saying that they had a ground coverage allowance.
Right,
If it
and
was
it-
certain, and we're not talking about that.
Right, because that got too complicated.
Yeah.
and
We
we're
axe
big-
that
Yeah,
from the proposal.
right, so
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
a way to
Kind
kind
of-
of.
We can't
This
talk about
is
anything
for-
else, huh?
People who are year round.
Yeah, because everybody's getting ready to go, so.
Right,
I'm
Well,
happy.
and they have to be year round. It's not for rent.
I read today for the first
I
time.
don't know how
there
that
might be an
ever
article
gets
that eliminates pickleball courts. I thought that was on our.
managed, because
I'll
I
briefly
know a lot
talk
of
about
people who have
Okay,
houses they're not supposed to rent, they rent,
Yeah.
but, that's good,
Yeah.
year round, yeah.
So in this bylaw, as it's proposed, there's language in there that talks about the monitoring and regulating of it, so. Currently for, say, Covenant Homes, the housing authority, by way of Housing Nantucket, is the monitoring agent for
But they
that.
know,
Well, so with this, it doesn't specify the agency, what it
Yeah.
does do. Is say each development will be subject to a regulatory agreement, they have to work in hand with the Affordable Housing Trust and select whoever that's
Yeah.
going to be to monitor and regulate.
Yeah, I
we
think
are
it's huge.
great at coming up with ideas as a community to try and solve problems, and it seems like it just gets abused a lot.
Yeah, you get shot in the foot, the tertiary thing, I think that became something, or the secondary, really, it started with the secondary. Oh, people will build second homes and rent them to year rounders. That was a great idea,
My family does.
that was a great idea, actually, so do we, so do Luke and I, but,
But what drives that?
not
I just
everybody
have
does
people
that.
live with me for free.
Yeah.
I mean,
We
your
do that
mortgage
too
is
in
what drives
summer.
it.
Huh?
It's a matter of economy.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just greed, it's like you're paying an exorbitant mortgage because the real estate prices and construction costs are very high and you are trying to make a life for yourself, so you rent stuff out. Like, it's
Well, of
not
course,
like
It's
a
not the
bad-
renting
No,
part, it's,
The intention was great, it's the people who don't do it, that the thing went awry. The idea was that second dwellings would be built and rented to Nantucketers. It's the people who don't do that, they build their second dwelling and they don't rent it, then that takes out, like, that's just such a shame, because the intention of that whole rule to have ability to have a second dwelling was for that purpose.
I don't disagree.
So
I'm just-
tertiary is similar thing, except tertiary now, I
well,
believe,
tertiary
you
has
have
to
to
be,
be, it has to be in residence by,
family.
inhabited by a resident.
there, well, Meg knows the details on
Right.
that, but it involves year-round occupancy of
Right.
one of the dwellings on the lot requires year-round occupancy.
For tertiary.
oh, but the
Right.
owner doesn't have to live on the lot, that's not a thing
No,
anymore, cause I know a
it's
guy who
or.
owns 30 of them.
It's or, so
Okay, so
it's-
we're gonna not go down that road.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have a side conversation of general.
But it's just, the idea is that good intentions go awry because everyone's got their own
And
desires.
we may, just to put a little teaser out there, we're not gonna talk about it today because there's some other things going on with it. We may have some discussion, I was just asked about, just because it affects HDC, just to have a discussion as a group about pickleball courts. Right now, that is an article with the planning board and they're working through the details and they have priorities on a lot of articles. So until that is kind of resolved, I don't want to bring it up in discussion because
Right.
we're not here to armchair editorialize.
We might see more applications for them though.
Yes, but
We will.
if that article's in there, people should be aware that it's,
It becomes,
we're actually gonna have a discussion
You
about
need to
whether we're gonna
adjourn.
review those.
Oh,
Well,
Motion to adjourn.
I know, I wanna just say something before because we just mentioned the pickleball courts and applications. We will be having an internal discussion about reviewing applications for the utility or the ability to maybe not review applications that are for something that's gonna be, may be restricted due to it having been posted in the newspaper.
Because of a violation.
Yeah, so, anyways, motion to adjourn. So moved. All in favor?
I.
Aye. Meg, thank you for
Sure,
calling.
thank